A hunger unlike any other. Lieutenant Jack Morrison had faced his fair share of challenges as a deep space engineer, but nothing in his years of rigorous training, countless survival drills, or near-death encounters with failing ship systems had prepared him for this nightmare. He was starving. Not the kind of hunger where you could push through the day and ignore the growling in your stomach. No, this was something primal, something that gnawed at his very being, making his hands shake slightly as he gripped the metal tray in front of him. The Iliad IV, the diplomatic starcruiser of the Galactic Unity fleet, was a marvel of technology. Faster than light travel, self-repairing hull plating, and an AI capable of handling complex negotiations across dozens of alien languages. But despite its many wonders, it had one massive flaw. There was no human food on board. Jack stood in line at the cafeteria, staring at the abysmal options available to him. A conveyor belt carried two distinct meal trays, one labeled herbivore and the other carnivore. He had made the mistake of picking the carnivore option on the first day of his assignment, only to nearly vomit at the sight of what looked like a still-moving gelatinous mass of raw flesh. Not cooked, not even seasoned, just slimy, pulsating organic matter. The alien next to him, a towering reptilian with emerald green scales, let out a contented hiss as it slurped up the contents of its tray. Jack had to fight the urge to gag. He forced himself to focus on the herbivore tray instead. Maybe there was something remotely edible in there. But no, all it contained was an assortment of leaves, grass, and what could only be described as fluorescent moss. Jack exhaled sharply and rubbed his temples. He had spent the last 3 days surviving off the emergency ration bars he had brought along. But those wouldn't last forever. The first diplomatic stop was still weeks away. If he didn't figure something out soon, he would be forced to choose between starvation and eating raw alien flesh. The cafeteria was packed with officers and crewmates from over a dozen species, all engaged in their own quiet conversations, completely oblivious to Jack's internal crisis. He spotted Captain Valiner, the ship's commanding officer, an avian-like alien with sharp, piercing eyes and an elegant cloak, eating with calculated precision. Maybe Jack could talk to the captain, request special meal considerations. No, that would make him look weak. He had worked too hard to earn his place as the first human engineer in a Galactic Unity diplomatic mission. He wouldn't be that guy, the one who couldn't adapt. Instead, he sighed, grabbed a tray of leaves, and walked to an empty table. He wasn't about to eat it, of course, but it would keep the questions away while he formulated a plan. The problem with omnivores. Jack had never thought much about what it meant to be an omnivore, at least not until now. In the Galactic Unity, species were broadly categorized into herbivores and carnivores for food allocation purposes. It was easier that way. The fleet's logistics system wasn't designed for picky eaters. But humans weren't strictly one or the other. They were an evolutionary anomaly. Back on Earth, Jack had no trouble eating everything from a rare steak to a plate of fresh vegetables. But here, the aliens had no concept of cooking, no understanding of spices, and absolutely no reason to consider dietary variety when designing meals. Carnivores ate raw meat. Herbivores ate raw plants. That was it. Jack clenched his jaw. Whoever had approved the dietary accommodations for this mission clearly had no idea what an omnivore actually was. He eyed the tray in front of him. The vine leaf, as it was called, was supposed to be mildly sweet by herbivore standards. He picked up one of the waxy, green leaves and took a tentative bite. Instant regret. It was like chewing on a damp paper towel soaked in bitter cough syrup. Jack forced himself to swallow. If he couldn't find a real food source soon, he was going to lose his mind. And then, as if on cue, someone sat down across from him. A curious encounter. Human, a voice said. Jack looked up and immediately stiffened. The alien before him had large golden eyes that seemed to glow under the dim cafeteria lights. Their face was framed by a feathery mane, and beneath their robes, Jack could see a second set of arms folded neatly against their chest. It was Captain Valiner. "Something troubles you," the captain continued, tilting their head slightly. Jack swallowed. His mind raced for an excuse, anything to avoid bringing up the fact that he was on the verge of starvation. Just adjusting," Jack said, forcing a smile. "New ship, new crew, new environment. You know how it is." Valner's eyes remained locked onto him, unblinking. "You are not eating," they observed. Jack hesitated. Lying to a superior officer was a bad idea. But telling the truth, that could make things worse. "Not much of an appetite today," Jack finally said. Silence stretched between them for a moment. Then, to Jack's surprise, Valner let out a soft, melodic sound, a laugh. "It is as I suspected," the captain said. "Your kind are strange. You require both plant and animal matter, yet neither of the available choices suit you." Jack exhaled, relieved that he didn't have to explain it himself. "Yeah," he admitted. "It's a bit of a problem." Valner studied him for a moment before speaking again. "There is a world we will visit soon. Elter 4. A lush, untamed planet with abundant resources. If I were you, I would prepare for the opportunity to acquire alternative provisions." Jack's breath caught in his throat. Was the captain suggesting what he thought they were suggesting? A hunt? Jack leaned forward slightly. "You're saying there's food there?" "Plenty," Valner confirmed, "for those capable of claiming it." Jack felt a slow grin form on his lips. Finally, a chance to eat real food. It wouldn't be easy. He had never hunted on an alien planet before. He had no idea what dangers awaited him on Eltar 4. But one thing was certain. Jack Morrison was not going to starve. The hunt begins. Jack Morrison had spent the past week starving in silence. But now he had a mission. Eltar 4, a lush, untamed planet at the fringes of galactic unity space. It was the first stop on their diplomatic route, and more importantly, his salvation. The captain had practically given him permission to do what no other crew member would dare: hunt. Jack had spent years in the United Nations Space Corps, but nothing in his training had prepared him for starving to death while surrounded by food. He wasn't going to let this ridiculous oversight end him. So, he planned. In his quarters, he laid out everything he had. A combat knife, standard issue, meant for utility more than combat. A collapsible rifle, limited ammo, but it packed enough punch to put down a human-sized threat. Thermal goggles, useful for tracking heat signatures. A basic survival kit, not ideal, but better than nothing. Most importantly, he had his skills. Jack had hunted before, not out of necessity. Earth had long since abandoned primitive survivalist traditions, but because it fascinated him. He had spent his childhood in the Appalachian wilderness, learning how to track deer, set traps, and clean a fresh kill. Now those skills would be the difference between survival and insanity. 3 days until they reached Eltar 4. 3 days to prepare. The silent observer. Unbeknownst to Jack, he wasn't the only one making preparations. Corex had been watching him for days. Axillarian, one of the smaller mammalian species in the galactic unity. Corex was a low-ranking communications officer, barely noticeable among the crew. His kind were herbivores by nature, small and agile, with soft fur and keen senses. But despite his unassuming stature, Corex had been tasked with a secret mission: observe the human. At first, he had assumed Jack was simply strange, a typical anomaly among newly integrated species. But something about the human unsettled him. The way he picked at his food without eating, the way he hoarded supplies from the cafeteria, the way his eyes scanned the room like a predator sizing up prey. Jack Morrison wasn't just adapting to life aboard the ship. He was preparing for something, and K-Rex was determined to find out what. Arrival at Eltar 4. The transition from hyperspace to real space was smooth. Jack stood near the loading bay as the massive cruiser entered orbit around Eltar 4. From above, the planet looked like an emerald jewel covered in vast forests, winding rivers, and towering mountain ranges. It was beautiful. More importantly, it was untamed. Jack checked his gear one last time as the landing ramp extended. Around him, other crew members were preparing for standard diplomatic duties, surveying the colony, checking supply catches, ensuring everything was up to galactic unity standards. But Jack wasn't here for diplomacy. The captain's words echoed in his mind. If I were you, I would prepare for the opportunity to acquire alternative provisions. Jack stepped onto the soft alien soil. It was time to hunt. Into the wild. Jack moved quickly, keeping to the shadows of the dense jungle. The planet's atmosphere was thick with moisture, the air rich with the scent of plant life. Strange, alien trees stretched hundreds of feet into the sky, their bark a deep shade of violet. He activated his thermal goggles, scanning for movement. Nothing yet. His first objective was simple: find a fresh water source. Predators always gathered near water. If he could locate a lake or river, he'd have a prime hunting spot. An hour passed. Then another. Finally, he found it. A massive river, its waters glowing faintly blue in the dim light. The ground here was torn apart, massive footprints embedded deep into the soil. Something big had been here. Jack crouched low, inspecting the prints. They were deep, wide, and clawed. Whatever made them was easily twice his size and heavy. A perfect target. But he wasn't the only one hunting. The apex predator. The first sign was the silence. Jack had spent enough time in nature to know when a forest goes quiet, it means something big is nearby. He raised his rifle, scanning the trees. His heartbeat quickened. Then he heard it. A deep guttural growl. Jack turned just in time to see the beast emerge from the foliage. It was massive, easily the size of a grizzly bear, but with the sleek musculature of a tiger. Its skin was armored, covered in dark, interlocking plates. But the worst part, its eyes. Deep-set and intelligent. The kind of intelligence that spoke of a creature that had never lost a hunt. Jack didn't move. This was a test. The beast was sizing him up, determining whether he was prey or competition. Jack's grip on his rifle tightened. He had one shot to prove he was the latter. He fired. The bullet struck just below the creature's eye, sinking deep into the armored plating. It roared in fury, shaking the ground beneath them. Jack rolled to the side as the creature lunged. Its claws ripped through the space where he had been standing just seconds before. This wasn't going to be easy. Jack took another shot, aiming for the joints, the weak points. The bullet struck true, and the beast staggered, but it wasn't enough to bring it down. Then something unexpected happened. The creature stopped. It stared at Jack, nostrils flaring. Its growl rumbled deep in its throat, and then, just as suddenly as it had attacked, it backed away. Jack held his breath, watching as the beast disappeared into the jungle. He had won, not by killing it, but by proving himself worthy. This planet wasn't just about survival. It was about earning respect. Jack exhaled, lowering his rifle. His hunt had just begun. The law of the jungle. Jack Morrison stood frozen in the dense underbrush, sweat dripping down his brow as he watched the apex predator disappear into the darkness of the alien jungle. His breathing was shallow, every nerve in his body screaming at him to run. But he didn't. He had just stared death in the face, and it had stared back, and walked away. It wasn't fear that drove the beast to retreat. It wasn't pain or weakness. It was recognition, a silent acknowledgement that Jack wasn't just prey. He was a competitor. And that changed everything. A hunter's code. Jack exhaled slowly, lowering his rifle. His heart was still hammering, but he wasn't about to let this encounter go to waste. The beast may have spared him, but that didn't mean it wasn't still his ticket to survival. He needed food. And if the predator was here, that meant something else was too. He crouched near the tracks, running his fingers through the deep indentations in the soil. The claw marks were fresh. But then, something caught his eye. Smaller prints. Hoofed. Scattered. Erratic. Jack smirked. Something had run from that beast, which meant it had run right into his hands. The chase begins. Jack followed the smaller tracks, moving swiftly through the underbrush. The jungle was alive with sound. Buzzing insects, distant calls of creatures that had yet to be classified, the rustle of leaves disturbed by something unseen. But Jack's focus was sharp. He was in the zone. He followed the trail through thick vegetation, ducking beneath massive purple vines that draped between towering alien trees. The air smelled strange, a mix of damp earth and something faintly metallic. And then he heard it, a sharp, distressed chirp. Jack froze, scanning the area. Through the gaps in the foliage, he caught a glimpse of movement, a creature, smaller than he expected, struggling in a cluster of thorned vines. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen before. About the size of a deer, but leaner, with 2 sets of hind legs and an elongated neck. Its body was covered in sleek, almost reptilian scales that shimmered in shades of bronze and green. Jack could see the panic in its large golden eyes. It had run from the predator, and straight into a death trap. The vines were coiling tighter. Jack didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, pulling his combat knife from its sheath and slicing through the thickest tendrils. The creature let out a sharp cry, flailing as Jack tore away the vines, freeing its legs just in time. It stumbled, weak from exhaustion, but quickly scrambled to its feet, staring at him. For a brief second, they locked eyes. Jack could almost feel the moment it realized that he wasn't another predator. Then, in a blur of motion, it bolted into the jungle. Jack sighed, watching it vanish. "Figures," he muttered, sheathing his knife. "Save a thing's life, and it doesn't even say thanks." He looked down at the severed vines, frowning. His stomach twisted. That thing could have easily been a meal, but something about killing it after saving it didn't sit right with him. A waste of effort. Maybe. But Jack had always believed in earning his meals. He needed something bigger, something worth the bullets. The perfect opportunity. Jack pushed deeper into the jungle. He was hungry, exhausted, and running on pure adrenaline. But he wasn't about to stop. Then he found it. The clearing opened before him like something out of a dream. A wide, shallow lake, shimmering under the dim light of Elterfor's twin moons. The water reflected the deep blues and purples of the alien sky, rippling ever so slightly in the evening breeze. But what caught Jack's attention wasn't the scenery. It was the herd. A dozen or so of the scaled deer-like creatures gathered at the water's edge. Drinking cautiously, their heads darted up every few seconds, alert for danger. Jack stayed low, his mind already working through the strategy. This was perfect. If the apex predator was the king of this jungle, these things were its livestock, and Jack was about to claim one for himself. The kill. Jack slowed his breathing, positioning himself downwind to avoid detection. The herd was on edge, but they hadn't spotted him yet. His rifle was silent, but that didn't mean it was foolproof. One shot. That's all he'd get. His eyes locked onto a young adult male, slightly separated from the group, strong enough to provide plenty of meat, but not so large that taking it down would cause a stampede. Jack exhaled. Steady. Focus. Pull the trigger. The rifle whispered, a soft theft as the bullet left the chamber. The shot hit perfectly, striking just behind a creature's skull. It collapsed instantly, its legs buckling as it crumpled into the grass. Jack didn't move. The rest of the herd scattered, darting into the jungle with frantic chirps. The silence that followed was absolute. Jack slowly lowered his rifle, letting the moment settle over him. He'd done it. He had food. Real food. The butcher's work. Jack worked fast, dragging the carcass closer to the tree line. He built a makeshift shelter out of broadleaf plants and used a few well-placed rocks to set up a basic drying rack. This wasn't just about eating tonight. This was about storing enough to last the rest of the mission. He worked methodically, skinning the creature with practiced precision. The meat was an odd color, almost a deep blue, but the texture was similar to venison. Good. He set up a small fire, keeping it controlled with heat-sink stones he had gathered along the way. Galactic Unity regulations were strict about open flames on starships, but here, the rules didn't apply. Jack sat by the fire, watching the meat slowly cook, the smell filling the air. For the first time in weeks, he felt human again. He took the first bite. Juicy, rich, perfect. Jack let out a deep sigh, leaning back against a rock. His hunger was gone. His plan had worked. And now he had everything he needed to survive. Or so he thought. Because in the distance, just beyond the fire's glow, something watched him. And this time, it wasn't just another predator. The eyes in the dark. Jack Morrison sat near the fire, his muscles aching, but his stomach finally full for the first time in weeks. The smell of cooked meat lingered in the air, blending with the earthy scent of damp jungle soil. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the dense foliage. He had done it. He had hunted, he had killed, and now he had food. And yet, something wasn't right. His instincts, honed over years of training and deep space survival drills, were screaming at him. He wasn't alone. Something was watching. Jack had felt it the moment he took the first bite. It wasn't just the eerie quiet of the jungle, nor the way the wind had suddenly stilled. It was a presence, unseen, patient, predatory. He kept his movements slow, nonchalant, as he reached for his rifle, propping it casually against his knee. Then he waited. The fire crackled. The meat sizzled, and the jungle stared back. A silent threat. Jack's eyes scanned the darkness beyond the firelight, his breath steady but controlled. He knew better than to move first. In the wilderness, movement meant weakness. The moment a predator thought you were afraid was the moment it decided to strike. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then, movement. A glint of eyes in the darkness. Not just one pair. Many. Jack's grip on his rifle tightened. He slowly shifted his position, inching his weapon closer without making any sudden moves. Then finally, one of them stepped forward. Jack's breath caught in his throat. It was the apex predator. Not just another of its kind, the same one he had encountered earlier. The same massive armored beast that had tested him before and decided to let him live. Only now, it wasn't alone. Two smaller creatures flanked it, similar in shape but leaner, more agile. They moved in perfect silence, their bodies lowered, muscles coiled. Jack's mind worked fast. A pack. This thing wasn't a lone hunter. It was the alpha of a group. And right now, that group was assessing whether the deal still stood. Jack had earned the alpha's respect. But the pack, they weren't convinced. And they wanted his kill. A dangerous bargain. Jack had three choices. 1. Fight. He could take down one or two of them, maybe even scare the rest off. But if they called his bluff, if they rushed him all at once, he'd be torn apart before he could reload. 2. Run. No chance. They were faster, stronger, and adapted to this jungle. Running would only make him look like prey. 3. Negotiate. If the alpha respected strength, then maybe the others did too. Maybe, just maybe, there was another way. Jack made his decision. Slowly, he reached toward the fire, not for his weapon, but for a piece of meat. Then, with deliberate calm, he tore a chunk off and tossed it toward the alpha. The meat landed between them, steaming, the scent thick in the humid air. Silence. The alpha stared at him, then at the offering. Then it moved. Not towards Jack. Towards the meat. It sniffed once, twice. Then it ate. Jack held his breath. The pack watched their leader. Then, One by one, they stepped forward. Jack did the same thing again, grabbing another chunk of meat and throwing it toward them. The smaller ones hesitated, then followed suit, devouring their share. Jack exhaled slowly. He had done it. Not just survived. He had just shared a meal with the deadliest creatures on this planet. A new understanding. For a long time, the predators lingered near the fire, watching him, studying him. They were no longer hostile, but that didn't mean they weren't dangerous. Jack stayed still, maintaining eye contact without challenging them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the alpha stood. It let out a deep, guttural rumble, a sound that sent a shiver down Jack's spine. Then, in a blur of movement, it turned and disappeared into the jungle, followed by the rest of the pack. Jack let out a long breath. He was still alive. And more than that, he had just done something no human had ever done before. He had negotiated with an apex predator, not through words, not through force, but through food. A hunter's truce. Jack leaned back against the rock, the firelight flickering against his face. For the first time since stepping onto Eltar 4, he didn't feel alone anymore. The watcher in the shadows, far beyond the firelight, just beyond Jack's awareness, Kirex watched. His heart was pounding. His mind raced. He had followed the human from the moment they landed, intending only to observe, to report back to the captain on whatever strange customs Jack was planning. But this changed everything. Kirex had seen the human hunt. He had watched him fight. But most importantly, he had watched him dominate the jungle without even lifting his weapon. The human had done something that no Xilarian, no Galactic Unity scientist, no seasoned explorer had ever accomplished. He had formed a connection with the deadliest creatures in the region. Kirex felt a shiver run down his spine. The Galactic Unity had underestimated humans. Badly. This wasn't just an adaptable species. This was a species that turned death into an ally. And Kirex wasn't sure if that made him impressed or terrified. One thing was certain. The captain needed to know. Because if humans could do this with a pack of apex predators, what could they do with the rest of the galaxy?